Hi, I'm Debbie Georgatos. Welcome to my show, America, Can We Talk? Today, we're going to talk about COVID and climate intersectionality. Inventor Andrew Whitney joins me, and the Atlantic smears Trump and the military. And of course, I'll tell you why these stories matter to you. Stay tuned.
Debbie Georgatos, host of America Can We Talk, is an author, attorney, and political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth.
Hello again and welcome to America Can We Talk and to today's First Five. There was an article written by Dr. Fauci, of whom we've spoken many times. Dr. Fauci, head of NIH, and really kind of driving and directing America's policy dealing with the threat of the coronavirus and COVID-19. Dr. Fauci published an article very recently in a magazine called Cell, C-E-L-L. And it was published along with Dr. David Morin's, and it's called Emerging Pandemic Diseases, How We Got to COVID-19. The reason I want to share that with you today is this. In this article, part of what Dr. Fauci talks about is, globally speaking, because we have so many more people living on Earth than we used to, that we have population growing, and we have, as described in this very lengthy scholarly article, we have more and more human interaction with natural elements of the planet, even though I would like to point out humans are also natural. We are part of the biology of the planet, but more and more human interaction, and therefore, he says, more likely to continue to have not just the coronavirus, but coronavirus, COVID-19, many other viruses, as he describes it, kind of natural reactions to the presence of humans, the growing presence of humans on Earth. He actually speaks of the idea that we, humankind, are entering into the pandemic era. And because of the pandemic era, which he is concerned about, he talks about the idea that we have to be deciding as human beings how we're going to live, how we're going to interact. Here's just one little clip from Dr. Fauci's article, which again you can read on our website, americacanwetalk.org. He says, SARS-CoV-2 is just the beginning. We're in a pandemic era. Now, friends, what is the solution? Live in greater harmony with nature. Living in greater harmony with nature will require changes in human behavior, as well as other radical changes that may take decades to achieve. Rebuilding the infrastructures of human existence. This is Fauci writing. Rebuilding the infrastructures of human existence, from cities to homes to workplaces to recreational and gathering venues in a human-dominated world, which is, I think, intended to be a jab at people, in a human-dominated world in which our human activities represent aggressive, damaging, and unbalanced interactions with nature, we will increasingly provoke new disease emergence. We'll probably talk about this on another show. The reason I raise it today in the first five is this. Obviously, commentators reading this are expressing some concern because he sounds a lot like Greta Thunberg or other people extremely concerned about climate change. But my point in this show is this. How much freedom are we Americans, everyone in the world, but let's focus here in this show on America, how much freedom in America are we willing to concede, to surrender, because of what Dr. Fauci is saying? Right now, here we sit in September 2020, we began the reaction to the coronavirus in March of this year, where we were told we'd all just kind of shelter in place and stay home and stop normal life, that we need about 2 weeks to flatten the curve, which had to do at that time with the spread of the virus and the availability of ICU beds and other hospital and medical attention. We're long past that issue. We're not dealing with that. That isn't the curve we're talking about anymore. But we're still in a place where so much of American life is under regulation, in many places, including the great state of Texas where I am, under regulation of kinds relating to things like businesses, whether they can be open or not, how many people can be inside businesses, where you're allowed to stand, where you're allowed to go, whether you're allowed to have outdoor gatherings, whether you can have family weddings and funerals, how many people can be inside a church, depending on the place you live in this country. Massive, ongoing not just, to say it nicely, regulation in order to prevent the spread of COVID. The way more people see it, including myself, is these are increasing infringements on the basic right in America to live in freedom. The idea that we have a right to live in freedom and that we don't surrender that right to the government. We have it guaranteed in our Constitution and in the very beginning of our country, in the Declaration of Independence, that each of us have rights from God, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To temporarily suspend those because of some crisis, yes. But if coronavirus, now with not nearly the death rates that were predicted at the beginning, and coronavirus, where we're still here in September 2020, living a very limited, very regulated life, we're being told over and over whether or not it's safe to go places, whether or not we can have rallies, whether or not we can have concerts together. The Los Angeles mayor just announced there will be no trick-or-treating this year, so no Halloween, no fall sports, no football in person with normal activity in a gym or in a field, no football, no baseball, no basketball, no college sports. Nothing normal is allowed to go on. And this is just this one virus. This is COVID-19 right now. And that really is the question I want you to think about very seriously. If Dr. Fauci's prognostications in this publication are correct, and we're just entering the pandemic era, does that mean we're entering the era of ending freedom in America? That all freedom henceforth will be decided by Dr. Fauci or others in power in Washington because of the threat of a virus? Or, on the other hand, are the American people going to stand up and say, you know what, we have a right to live in freedom, and the immediate crisis, the need to flatten the curve to prevent a massive spread, which did not happen in America, are we in this country going to say we'll just stay home and frozen in place until we're told periodically by the government, by Dr. Fauci or others, that it's okay to go out of the house, it's okay to go to the store today, it's okay to stand next door to your neighbor, it's okay to hug your friends? I actually think there's a rising tide, and there should be, of people in America saying we're not going to surrender all of freedom in this country because of this virus, and even more so when you see Dr. Fauci saying we're talking about, as his term, the pandemic era we're entering, where everything is going to be regulated by those who think they have authority just because they want to stop the spread of disease, to tell you how much liberty you have. In America, that is not okay. And that, my very fine friends, is today's First Five. I mentioned at the start of the show we have a great, great guest joining us, and he's joining us, you'll see him in a moment. But I do want to tell you a little bit about him. His name is Mr. Andrew Whitney, and I met him through a mutual friend. And when my friend was first telling me about this Andrew Whitney, he's saying, yes, he has this invention, he has, he's come up with this idea, he's put this concept into place. He is a brilliant thinker on many, many fronts, a brilliant thinker, a problem solver, not just issues related. In fact, the other issues of which I'm aware he was working had to do with energy, had to do with the environment, just a great inventor and thinker. And he has come upon something that is related to COVID-19. So Andrew Whitney is currently the vice chairman and director of the Phoenix Biotechnology, and he's here to talk about what he became aware of, this possible treatment for COVID-19 and how it's going, and trying to introduce that to America. So I believe we have him on the phone, online. Hi, Andrew.
Hello, Debbie. Wonderful to be here.
Great to see you, sir. Well, you know what? I mentioned to you before the show started today, I've talked with our guests, our listeners in the past, about hydroxychloroquine, elements of what's happened with some doctors in Texas and other places using it successfully to treat COVID-19. We've dealt with budesonide, the inhaled steroid that one doctor in Texas is strongly advocating. You've got something else, and because it is novel, so far as I'm aware, I may have been reading a little bit about it, but it's called oleandrin. It's from the oleander plant. I would love to have you just start with telling our listeners what exactly this product is that you are thinking and talking about that may be successful treating COVID.
Well, thank you for that intro, Debbie. I'm very blessed to be part of a team that is working on this particular proposition. And we have a fantastic scientific team that's been working on this for over 25 years. This particular plant extract, which is 100% botanical, it's found in nature. It's a gift from God. It's a remarkable thing, and I'll tell you all about it. I know, I just want to convey the fact there are a lot of smart people in our company that works on all this. So think of me as perhaps the business guy. It's my job to make it work on a commercial level, but there are some very, very bright people behind me that do the real hard work, which is the research into this for over 25 years. The molecule concerned is called oleandrin, and it comes from inside a plant called Nerium oleander, more commonly known as the oleander plant. And we've spent 25 years understanding the isolation of that compound and understanding its effects. The work was originally done for cancer therapy, and it's actually already been put through phase 1 and phase 2 human clinical trials for that purpose. So we were able to establish it was safe in humans and arrive at an approximate dosage. That's the point of FDA phase 1 and 2 human clinical trials. So we already had done that. And then there was a serendipitous discovery that it had important antiviral properties. And very important work has been done with such institutions as MD Anderson and also the US Army's infectious disease lab at Fort Detrick in Maryland, where we've looked at a number of different viruses where there's been tremendous efficacy in vitro in the laboratory. And those range from Marburg virus through to Ebola virus, for which there are currently no known cures. And we've seen remarkable results in a laboratory setting. As a result of that work, we found that a lot of the viruses that we had an effect on were what are referred to as envelope viruses. And we drew the conclusion that there might be a proposition here for coronavirus, given that coronavirus is also an envelope virus. We had the opportunity to work with the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston and do some in vitro testing of the proposition against COVID. And we saw an average 20,000-fold reduction in viral infectivity in the presence of our compound. So that gave us reason to believe there could be real potential here. Plus, of course, we already knew it was safe in humans because of the FDA phase 1 and 2 that was already completed, albeit for a cancer therapy application, but the same compound.
So just to be clear, the phase 1 and phase 2, you just said a moment ago, but this means that FDA has looked at this particular product, oleandrin, and the phase 1 and phase 2 both deal with basically the do no harm phase of testing a drug. Is that right? It's not a drug, it's a natural product.
That's correct, yeah.
The FDA said it's safe and efficacious. You use the expression an envelope virus, and I believe I know what you mean, but can you explain what that is?
So an envelope virus is essentially an RNA strand inside a glycoprotein wrapper. And in part of the work we've done in an in vitro setting, we've been able to establish that when exposed to our compound, or when in the presence of our compound, there can be a missing glycoprotein in the viral envelope. Now, whether that is the cause of the massive reduction in infectivity or that is somehow a consequence of that process, either way, those two things are correlated. There's a massive drop in viral infectivity of the viral progeny, the offspring of the virus, the replicated particles of virus. And there's a massive drop off in the infectivity of those while you see this missing glycoprotein at the same time.
So you're testing so far, again, this is through the Phoenix Biotechnology Group that's doing all this?
That's correct.
Okay, so the testing so far shown to be effective dealing with cancer, and you talk about in vitro, that kind of testing has been shown no harmful side effects. Actually, one quick thing. So our listeners, to be clear, oleander, the plant itself, is known to be poisonous. And so I believe, in fact, that's probably one reason there's a little bit of a concern people might have just saying, isn't that thing poison? But obviously it's been poison all along, and you've extracted a small enough portion and maybe somehow you've extracted a powerful element in it that does not prove to be poisonous when placed in the medications used already.
Well, let me clarify some of these points.
Please.
So the FDA phase 1 and phase 2 study that was done, that was on a pancreatic cancer application. And when you do FDA phase 1 and 2, what you're essentially doing is you will keep increasing a dosage until you find some sort of negative feedback. And oftentimes that can be a heart arrhythmia or something, because the heart tends to be one of the tissues that reacts in the presence of a compound that's not welcome in the body. And when you test in animals, for example, you test to a threshold called LD50, which is the lethal dose at which half the animals die. Now, clearly you can't do that with humans. So you keep increasing the dosage until you get to a threshold where you see the beginnings of cardiac arrhythmias and other side effects. In our case, we got to 16 times the proposed dosage before we saw any of that. So to put that in context, that's the difference between taking 2 ibuprofen tablets and taking 32 of them. You know, it's an enormous difference. So is it declared safe? You know, in every application, we haven't gotten that determination from the FDA or anybody else yet. But what we do know is it's gone through human safety trials, phase 1 and phase 2, for a cancer application, where it was still safe at even very, very high thresholds of concentrations. Now, to put that in context, there are a lot of things in nature that are unsafe if you overconsume them. And in this case, you would have to consume 600 doses of our product at the same time, plus a pint of oil, which is the carrier that it sits in order to reach a toxic level. And to give you a comparison, if you take about 15 doses of nutmeg, that's also toxic for you. A dose of nutmeg is a quarter of a teaspoon. So, you know, there are a lot of things around, like rhubarb stems, like Botox, that, you know, they're part of everyday life, it seems, these days. Lots and lots of things around. Alcohol is another one. Yeah, you know, if you take too much of it, it won't be good for you. But I mean, this is a tiny, tiny fraction. And as I say, we already took it through phase 1 and phase 2 human clinical safety trials. And even at very, very high doses, it was not deemed toxic.
So, of course, I saw the story that this idea was floated at the White House, that the gentleman who's been involved with My Pillow had gone to some meeting at the White House, been talking about the president is aware of this potential to have this treatment, oleandrin, become something maybe impacting and maybe being used in America dealing with COVID-19. But where does it sit in terms of your efforts to get this product, oleandrin, moving forward to potentially being marketed and helping people who have COVID-19?
Sure, I can speak to that. So we've actually been in the process of working with the FDA and through the FDA process since March. So it's been a good few months now. We submit documents, they ask us more questions, we submit more documents. So we've absolutely followed the process. And I know there's this negative narrative out there that suggests that we just blew into the White House like some sort of tumbleweed, as though that would ever happen. In fact, we were tremendously fortunate to have the interest of Mike Lindell, who's a great American businessman. Take a look at what we're doing as a company. He found it persuasive. I was able to meet one of his good friends, Dr. Ben Carson, now Secretary Ben Carson, who is obviously a very, very accomplished surgeon, as the former head of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins. I had the opportunity to show him the data we had from the UTMB work and the previous clinical trials. He obviously went into that with some detail and found it to be very compelling. He brought it to the attention of the Coronavirus Task Force because, as a member of the Coronavirus Task Force, that's part of his job. As a result of that, we ended up getting the opportunity to brief the president on the topic. And in the course of that conversation, I was asked, what we wanted. It's very simple, Debbie. All we're looking for is the opportunity to conduct a clinical trial. That's it. We're not looking for any kind of blanket approval, but we know, given that we have something that's already passed phase 1 and phase 2 human clinical safety trials per the FDA's own standard of safety, even at very elevated dosages, 16 times what we propose. And on the other hand, we had immensely compelling data from the University of Texas Medical Branch, one of the most prestigious academic institutions in this country, and the first to sequence COVID-19 in the US, by the way, of a 20,000-fold reduction in viral infectivity in vitro. Logically, one would want the opportunity to conduct a clinical trial in humans.
So where do you stand on your efforts to try to have a clinical trial conducted on humans with oleandrin?
We're still very much in the process of that. In the meantime, we have now some pretty significant anecdotal human data that's been shared with the FDA, which is very compelling indeed. And there's going to be an announcement about that very shortly. And I think people will find it remarkably interesting.
I love hearing that. I like you smile when you say it. Remarkably interesting. So is it accurate that in order to be authorized to do testing, to do the next phase of human testing, FDA has to approve that ahead of time? That's right.
Yes, that is the case. You need something called an IND number to conduct hospital tests.
And so are you sensing there's some delay in that effort, or do you anticipate that to be forthcoming?
We are surprised it's taking as long as it's taken. We believe that given that there's already plenty of evidence for the safety of this, and there are plenty of indications of the efficacy of this, all we're asking for is an opportunity to test it in a supervised environment under the auspices of an IND number, and we don't think that's a particularly onerous ask, particularly given the circumstances in this country at the moment. And I will remind you, Debbie, I mean, not that you need reminding, but in the last 2 months alone, we've lost more Americans to COVID-19 than the entire capacity of Madison Square Garden. And on top of that, I think the toll is now about 165,000 since March. So we've been pushing on this since March, and that's the death toll so far, not to mention the disruption to families, businesses, communities, and the wider country. So there's every reason, we believe, to give us an opportunity to test this.
I would certainly think so. And I know you haven't been part of other shows I've had where we've talked about these issues, but it is an astonishing pushback by some elements of and for example, in Texas, the Texas Medical Board and medical boards in states around the country, and statements out of even national figures pushing back against treatments such as hydroxychloroquine, which many doctors have found effective, and yet just almost a war on it from not just some medical authorities, but from the media. Same thing dealing with inhaled budesonide, the steroid treatment that is being used, is legal to use, but it's been criticized. It's an astonishing thing, because you're right, the death toll is horrible, and the toll on human life, on families, on just the normal functioning of life has been horrific. You would think there would be a jumping up of enthusiasm coming from medical authorities trying to look at possible solutions and wanting to move them forward, and yet it seems that it seems like it's taking you longer than you anticipated to have testing come. So what do you think accounts? And actually there's been some media and there are always different media sources that seem to have an agenda, but media kind of dismissing, nope, can't count that one, can't count oleandrin. So what is your sense of why that's happening?
That's a very good question, Debbie. I mean, it's no doubt the case that there's something going on here, because I can't speak to the efficacy of hydrochloroquine, but what I can say is that for at least the last 5 or 6 decades, it's been deemed absolutely safe for people from the standpoint of treating malaria. I've used it when I've traveled internationally, and I'm sure you have too. It was absolutely fine until somebody connected it to a possible remedy for coronavirus, and suddenly the sky was falling. So you can't resolve those two things. There's clearly an agenda there. That is a problem. We've seen a lot of the same stuff. We've done phase 1 and phase 2 human clinical safety trials for our compound in a cancer therapy application. The minute it's mentioned in the context of COVID-19, suddenly there's panic in the streets, or at least as far as a certain element of the media is concerned. And we've seen a coordinated negative media campaign on that. If our proposition is really as ridiculous, it's this ridiculous little botanical that people would have you believe, or this dangerous plant remedy, why the fuss would be my argument. There does seem to be some sort of agenda of cure cancelling, and it's so strange, Debbie, because we're all in this together. We're all Americans. We all want to see people better. Yeah. This doesn't need to be politicized at all, and yet it is. And your opening statement about Dr. Fauci and his peculiar Malthusian projections of overcrowding and the demise of mankind at the hand of all these inevitable pandemics, it's absolutely bizarre. It certainly warrants further discussion. But what I would say to you about the inevitability of disaster on this, you're no doubt familiar with the University of Southampton analysis that showed if China had shut down the international flights as quickly and as comprehensively as they shut down their domestic flights, then 98% of the casualties and thus the economic damage of COVID-19 would have been avoided. That has nothing to do with the inevitability of any pandemic. It's just national policy.
I'm so glad you raised that. It's an astonishing statistic that came out making that point. And yeah, and America is talking about, of course, trying to figure out how do we get at the root of what really happened in China. There are a lot of questions that actually my national security type guests have about how the whole thing got going and how it got spread. I did mean to ask you one thing back to oleandrin, the product, this natural product you're talking about that may be very efficacious as a therapy for COVID-19. Is it expensive to produce?
It is not. It's very low cost to produce, and we can produce it in an enormous quantity right now. So there's no waiting for a vaccine that seems to oscillate around between February or strangely enough now it's November, or any of that. This is available right now in scale, and it has very, very compelling arguments behind it.
It sure does. I'm so glad you're available to talk today about that and share all this with us. Is there a place, I know on our website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage under shows, drop-down list of links, I included links to a couple of articles. There were articles by Frank Gaffney at the Center for Security Policy talking about this product. They had actually, I think, interviewed you also talking about this. So where can people go to learn more about this? Is there a place to go learn more about oleandrin?
Absolutely. If you can go to our website, which is phoenixbiotechnology.com. That's all one word, phoenixbiotechnology.com. Phoenix Biotechnology Inc. on Facebook, and the Twitter handle is Phoenix Bio Inc.
Phoenix Bio Inc. Okay, I'm glad you had all of those. So, in wrapping up today, first of all, is there anything else you want to share about this journey, the efficacy of oleandrin, where you are trying to get it out there? I'd love to have you share it.
Well, just one simple point, really, Debbie, which is that here we are 9 months down the road now, where the system, as it stands, has had unlimited power and resources at its disposal to come up with a solution, and yet we don't have a single approved treatment, drug, therapy, cure, remedy, or other therapeutic or vaccine of any kind. So, in spite of all that power and resources, the system has not been able to deliver yet. So all we're asking, given the fact we've already got proof of safety in humans per the FDA's own phase 1 and phase 2 standard, and we've got compelling data both in vitro and anecdotal human data now, all we're looking for is a test. And I would hope your audience would support the need for that kind of test as well.
Absolutely true. I love that people can go to Twitter and find you too, because that's a great place to spread the word to people who tend to also spread the word. They understand something going on. They want to be to help get the word out. Andrew Whitney, I'm so glad you're available today. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for all that great information about oleandrin.
Thanks for having us, Debbie.
Good to see you, sir. Okay, folks, I will tell you, I encourage you again on our website, you can go read this story. This is the most amazing thing. This guy is obviously, in fact, I alluded before he came on to what kind of an inventor he is. And I don't know what term he would even use. He's kind of I'm a Renaissance man kind of guy, but he has developed amazingly efficacious processes and inventions that deal from everything ranging from desalinizing the ocean water to make it accessible to people in countries with water shortages, to dealing with getting energy to countries, developing an offshore sites, and I mean, he is just this resourceful guy, and got involved with this company, trying to help them move forward. And I think it's deeply troubling that, because he's being very polite, very professional, but they've kind of hit a brick wall. They have shared this information, as you hear, he laid out. They have human testing already done, because the drug, it's not even a drug, it's a natural product. It's an extract of a natural product, naturally occurring product in nature. And they have information available to the FDA, let them see the studies. They have a University of Texas study. They have information, and it just is getting stonewalled right at the wall of the FDA in terms of getting to the next phase, which will be, as he was saying, a controlled study involving humans to understand how effective it could be. When I hear whatever it is he's doing, he mentioned that there'll be some news coming out in very soon, a few days, relating to more human testing examples. I will definitely share it with you. But I just think it's an amazing time you live in. You go back to my first segment today, and Dr. Fauci saying we're entering the era of pandemics, and so we're all going to have to kind of backpedal, and all going to have to be more, aware we're living in harmony with nature. We have to change the way we live, all sorts of huge changes are implied by the words Dr. Fauci used in that article. And yet, we have in front of us, for this COVID-19, we have hydroxychloroquine. We've had doctors on the show talking about that. We have inhaled budesonide. We now have oleandrin. These are products that real human beings who actually have authority and ability to understand and test are using, and somehow we're at a log jam. That's the nicest way to say it, a log jam, where somehow these things aren't getting rapid fire testing, aren't getting put forward as fast as they can. In fact, there's a great pushback coming from the medical community, some of the medical community, and some at the national level who seem to want the only answer to be a vaccine. I'm going to turn to my last topic in a moment, but I wanted to close out this segment with Andrew Whitney. I noticed yesterday, and there were several people commenting on this show about what does Debbie think, what do I think about the whole vaccine and the rush to get a vaccine available. And I do want to share some thoughts with you about that. I am very much in favor of, freedom to practice medicine, freedom of doctors to use that expensive education they have and all they've learned from their education, their study, to figure out what best treatments are, to make them available for people. I'm in favor of pharmaceutical companies developing new products. I wish they would do it all in America and stop developing them in China, but I'd like them to do it in America. I'm in favor of the freedom of the American free market, the entrepreneurial system, and pharmaceutical companies working to continually come up with new efficacious treatments. I think this is all part of freedom. I am concerned about the rush for the push for a vaccine, both this idea of putting enormous amounts of money into the development of a vaccine in a very, very fast-paced way. And so it's the money put in, it's your tax dollars, a lot of federal money, your tax dollars being pushed toward the emergency rushed development of a vaccine. I have great concern about that. And I have great concern about that path of developing a vaccine really being the reason offered or the excuse offered by many people who are at the same time putting the kibosh on hydroxychloroquine, on budesonide, and oleandrin. You have a conflict of interest when you're doing that. If you are heavily invested in the vaccine industry and you're going to make money off a vaccine, and you'll make money off a vaccine, and you want that vaccine to be effective, that's all fine. I'm in favor of investing, in favor of people having investment in vaccine if they want to, in pharmaceutical companies. But when you have an interest in it, and you will serve to make money, you either professionally invested, financially invested, reputationally invested in the vaccine coming from pharmaceutical companies. I don't want to have to trust your directing of things to say this is the only solution. It's one thing, go ahead, develop a vaccine, let people who want to try it, let people who don't want to try it, don't make them try it. So I'm concerned about the money, I'm concerned about the conflict of interest, and I'm concerned the biggest concern of all, I'm mostly concerned about the impending seeming crush of America's freedom flowing from all these facts. And by that I mean this. Lots of talk about the idea that no other treatment can be effective, so we're going to ignore all these other treatments, even though doctors and tests are showing they work. Ignore them, but we're all going to get in line and wait for the vaccine to be ready. And many people talking about, in fact, some countries, not America, but other countries are putting the vaccine as a limit on your freedom, to get on an airplane, to get on a train, to get on public transportation. In China and a couple other countries say now, you have to show that you have either you've proven that you've already been through COVID, you have the antibodies, you're not contagious. You have to prove your health status to get on a plane. And a lot of talk about, not just out of Bill Gates, but many others, about the whole notion of the idea that this is a pathway toward making the world a safer place, because everybody's going to go along with the vaccine ritual, the vaccine protocol. Everyone's going to get not just this one, but every other vaccine coming forward, and this is going to be your ticket to freedom. This is going to be your ticket to be allowed to leave your house, to be allowed to get on mass transport, to be allowed to travel, to get on planes, to go to concerts, to go to public venues, to go anywhere. And for people who think that sounds far-fetched, it is already true. It's not a, kind of sci-fi in the future, this may happen. It's already true that pharmaceutical companies have the capacity to place in a vaccine, in the thing that's injected in you as a vaccine, a tracer, so they know whether or not you've had that. They would say, hey, it's a safety thing. Look at this, we can figure out when kids in school whether they've had their vaccines, not because we wait to get a list of a report from their parents, but we can just hold up the handy dandy little checker next to this person and say, oh yeah, they've had all their vaccines, they can move on. This idea of becoming a country where we're going to have the government set up a system that says we're going to figure out if you're properly vaccinated, and now that we have the famous vaccine for COVID-19, and by the way, folks, it'll only be a vaccine, even if they get an effective one that doesn't have side effects, that doesn't kill anybody. It's only going to be a vaccine for this particular strand of COVID-19. Then you have the next strand come along. Or as you hear Dr. Fauci, as I pointed out in the opening segment today, he's saying we're entering the pandemic era. We're going to have many, many vaccines needed, of course, because many, many viruses are coming along. We're going to enter an era where the government is saying your freedom is going to be limited until you prove to the satisfaction of the government that you've gotten all the vaccines, line them up, whatever the current vaccine protocol is going to be, you're going to take them all, and that's how we know you are going to be safe to travel. That's how you can tell you are in charge of your own freedom, because you can take the vaccines or you can lose your freedom. And you might think what I'm saying sounds far-fetched and conspiracy theory. People, we have to be alert to how dangerous this whole setup is already. Alert to the fact that we have, for the first time in American history, since March of this year, first time in American history, we have succumbed, we have surrendered to mandated shutdowns of businesses, of human life, of wearing masks in public and facing a penalty if you won't do it, of forced separation, of refusal to permit public gatherings, except of course if it is an anti-American rally, an anti-police rally, then you can do that all day long. But normal American citizens wanting to attend normal American rallies have been greatly limited, and plenty of people in this country seem to think it's just fine, including the petty little tyrants putting those rules in place in their cities and towns. So back to what I think about vaccines. I never would want to have the government tell the vaccine companies, no, never mind, don't do this, don't develop it. I am deeply troubled by the speed with which people are pushing to have this vaccine developed, because as you've heard Dr. Bartlett say in this show and other experts say around the country, we've had a history in America of developing vaccines on a fast pace out of panic, and we had some really, really bad outcomes, like death, like infecting children with polio when we're trying to inject them with a vaccine to prevent polio. We've had the same danger come from other flu vaccines. It is very dangerous to push this vaccine in the rushed way it's being pushed. I'm not an anti-vaxxer that wants all vaccines eliminated from the planet Earth. I think it's a free country and businesses can develop them, doctors can recommend them, patients can choose them. That's one set of issues. Of course, you don't want to limit development of things that might help people. But the entire vaccine agenda has become far too alarming in this country, far too pushy, far too demanding, and the allure hanging over, the danger you can see over the cliff is a kind of talk that you hear out of Fauci from the first segment today, that we're in the pandemic era, we're going to have virus after virus, there will always be some solution he will find, and it'll always be another vaccine, another limitation. On vaccines, I am very troubled by the fact that people invested in the vaccine companies, that would include largely Dr. Fauci and others, people invested in the vaccine world are the same ones dissing budesonide, dissing hydroxychloroquine, dissing the oleandrin we just heard about from Andrew Whitney. It is not okay for people with that kind of conflict of interest who are invested intellectually, professionally, and financially in vaccine world, in the vaccine development, to be saying, and none of these other solutions that seem to be doing a great job can even be tested. It's a very dangerous time if we, the American people, stand up for that. And I go back to what I closed out the first 5 with today, and I want to really urge you to think about this. If you read what Fauci wrote, or read the summary of what he wrote, you realize he's talking about we're entering an era where we're going to have more pandemics. He's way down the climate change, overpopulation worry, where he's getting down the path saying because of all the people and the planet, the nature's fighting back, we have to be friendly to nature, so therefore, don't you see? We have to make major structural changes in how we live as humans. This is coming from the guy not okay with any of the solutions other people have found for COVID that doctors are saying work, and pushing always everybody freeze in place and wait for the vaccine for COVID-19, and then compounded with, he's saying, and we got a whole bunch more coming, and we're going to have more vaccines, don't you worry, we're going to be in charge of your future freedom. America needs to understand, if you take the path Fauci's talking about, you could end up in a place where America just waits every day at home to find out whether they're allowed to leave their house today, where they're allowed to go, whether they can have their business open, whether they have to get yet another vaccine to comply with yet another perceived danger of some other virus, or are we a country rooted in freedom as promised in the Declaration of Independence, where no one in this country, we the people, did not vote. We had no election putting Dr. Fauci and all of the vaccine committed leadership in Washington, no one voted them to be in charge of the future of freedom of America. But that's the role they're taking, and it is up to Americans to stand up and protest. In great part, we need to throw off all of the current regulations and limits on the freedom of the American people to live their life freely, not be overwhelmed with, not be subjected to the endless regulation of masks, social distancing, businesses can't be open, restaurants can only be open if you're distanced. All of this is flowing from the Fauci mindset that is saying this is a danger, and therefore, because it's a danger, the entire country of America has to wait to be told by Dr. Fauci whether you can go out to dinner tonight with your neighbors and give them a hug at the end of dinner. This cannot be the future of freedom in America. It's going to take Americans standing up and fighting back. I'm going to hit one more topic today very, very briefly, because I didn't want to just let this go entirely, but you probably all saw the story that was in Atlantic magazine. And I just, since people covered it to death, I just want to say a couple quick points about it before I wrap up today. So the Atlantic, which is a radical left magazine, we've talked before in this show, stories they cover, they're anti-Trump, they're anti-freedom, they're anti-religion, they're anti-conservatism, they're anti-American. They are a left-wing mouthpiece with a name that they've had for decades and makes them sound, for some reason, the Atlantic always carries kind of the cachet of, well, that's kind of intellectual, because the articles are long and they're really much better, that they're not a tabloid. They're like a tabloid. But I want to tell you that what happened with this one, because it matters to understand. So the writer of this article, Jeffrey Goldberg, wrote in the Atlantic that back in 2018, when President Trump was on an official visit in France, that he refused to go visit a cemetery that contains the remains of American soldiers, that he refused because it was raining that day and he didn't want to mess up his hair. He was afraid the rain would make his hair look bad. This was Goldberg's claim, and that Trump made some reference to people who didn't survive the war as losers. Like Trump supposedly said, I'm not getting out there in the rain, ruining my hair, and to go see the cemetery, the graves of a bunch of losers. So this guy, Goldberg, writes this as though it's a serious story in the Atlantic, claiming, as leftists always do, unnamed sources, anonymous sources, informed sources who cannot be identified. That's his source for the story, unnamed sources. So he runs this story, and fortunately for President Trump, and fortunately for America and people who care about the truth, numerous people came up, spoke up right away and said, wait a minute. That is not what happened. He was over there and he was told that it was too stormy. It was raining. It was too stormy for the helicopter to take him. It was dangerous because of the wind and the rain for the helicopter to fly that day. We all know bad stories about helicopters flying in bad weather. So he was told, and so somebody, fortunately, decided to actually dug up the story and found the actual military record to show what happened that day, which was, they were told documents from the Navy, from a Freedom of Information Act, Trump's 2018 visit to Ain Marne American Cemetery near Paris, and the documents say his transport was canceled by the Navy due to rain. In addition, two other people who are not particularly friendly to President Trump, one of them being this guy, Zach Fuentes, who is an aide to John Kelly, also not too friendly to President Trump. Zach Fuentes said, I'm going to tell you that I know exactly what happened. We told him he couldn't go because of the rain. That's what happened. So everyone there who knows about the story is saying, this is a lie. This didn't happen. Trump did not do that. But, you know, Atlanta could not resist the idea of running the story anyway. So they run the story. All these people actually there spoke up, and not one of the alleged unnamed sources came forward and said, okay, you know, I'm not going to let this story die. I'll tell the truth. I heard Trump say he can't stand the military. I mean, I heard Trump say some bad things. So you have everyone there saying it didn't happen. The Atlantic, who hates Trump, saying it did happen. And by the way, I want to say a couple of things about this guy. First of all, about Atlantic itself. So the Atlantic, 70% ownership of the Atlantic magazine belongs to Lauren Powell Jobs. So she's, you know, she owns 70%. You know, she's a total leftist. She has donated in the range of $1.2 billion to Biden and other Democrat candidates over her life. She's a leftist. She loves Biden. She loves leftists. She's allowed to be, but this is her magazine, radical left, never to be believed, just never to be believed. So that's one thing. But the other interesting, and I'll close out this little segment by saying this about this guy, Jeffrey Goldberg. So he was actually around, the writer of the article in Atlantic. He was around during the Obama era. And he was kind of an insider with Obama. He has his picture in the Oval Office with Obama. So he's in with Obama, and he's Jewish, this guy, Jeffrey Goldberg, and he's one of these ones, a Jewish American who hates Israel, always sides against Israel, was kind of a bit of an advisor to Obama, telling him how to talk about Israel and you know, what to say about them, because he's, you know, it's an astonishing thing, but there are actually millions of them, Jewish Americans who hate Israel. Who the heck knows why? Anyway, so he was a conduit. Goldberg is one that is giving voice to the kind of mission, the kind of messaging, talking points from Obama out to the American public. So he's a big insider with Obama. Well, you know, one thing just to think about for a moment is, if you're Jeffrey Goldberg, and pretty much everything Obama did in the foreign policy world, especially related to Israel, you know, you felt you were kind of like, you know, feather in your cap. Yeah, I helped Obama. And it's all been eviscerated by Trump. Trump moved the American embassy in Israel to where the Israelis wanted it, in Jerusalem, their capital. Trump stood down, finally got America out of the ridiculous Iranian deal. You have Trump making all sorts of accomplishments in the Middle East that Obama could never make and didn't try to make. And so I could say, as a personal motivation possibility, is the idea Goldberg just does not like Trump kind of really leaving his, you know, Obama's foreign policy legacy in ruins. These things matter, folks. I have to tell you that even though I can tell you these stories, I'm going to guess a lot of you already realize the story probably wasn't true. Trump wouldn't say that. Trump has been so favorable to the military. He has raised their pay. He has refunded the military. You know, Trump is a huge supporter of the military. And that story, you read and think, that can't be true. But you know that because you're smart and you read. But there are literally, you wonder why people like Goldberg run stories like that in the Atlantic, because there are ignoramuses in this country who read one story and think, oh, well, you know, I thought I liked Trump, but if he's not very patriotic, if he said that about American soldiers, I mean, there are people who would draw conclusions from idiotic stories like that. That, my friends, is a very, very frustrating thing, but I want to urge you to be alert from now until Election Day, and frankly, now until the end of time, to recognize that the Democrat media mob, the leftists in this country, including the Atlantic magazine, will go out of their way to attack President Trump and conservatives and Republicans and America and freedom and capitalism every chance they get. Start to be more and more discerning, more and more willing to say, I heard that story, but then again, it was in the Atlantic, so never mind. Or, so at least I'll go research and find out myself what happened. Because you have outlets like this, the Atlantic, and other, sadly, many, many leftist outlets working day and night from now until Election Day, cooking up the next accusation against Trump, hoping to stir people into hating him and voting against him. As I do at the close of every show, I want to tell you why the stories we talked about today matter to you. So we start our show today with the COVID and climate intersection. I didn't get off this intersection thing as much as I wanted to, but I'm going to keep talking to you about what intersectionality is. But Dr. Fauci writes in The Cell, a new era of pandemics, explosion of viruses in danger. Nature is fighting back against humanity. Humanity must change its behavior, live in greater harmony with nature. And therefore what? What is it he's going to ask us to do? Freedom for humanity, after thousands of years of struggle, is now over? BLM, COVID, and climate change have altered all of world history all at once in 2020. And that is the intersectionality thing I didn't get to. I'll get to another day. But there's this theory floating out there among leftists, in fact, articles I'll share with you, among leftists saying that BLM, police brutality, COVID, and climate change are all bundled together as a massive conspiracy against people of color. There's actually writing out there combining those things. That's that intersectionality garbage. Back to this. So BLM, COVID, and climate change have altered all world history all at once in 2020. No more sports. No more Halloween in Los Angeles. No handshaking, no restaurants, no concerts. And this is my question, my friends. How much freedom will you surrender? And for how long? Forever? Would you stay home? Would you live like this forever if someone told you this is what's needed to be safe from the next virus? Freedom, individual rights come from a power higher than Dr. Fauci. Americans know this, and they're fed up with this insanity. And the Atlantic smears Trump and the military. The Atlantic, Jeff Goldberg, are financially linked to Democrat left-wing money through Lauren Jobs. Comments attributed to Trump now definitively refuted on the record by more than 12 people, including anti-Trumpers like John Bolton and Zach Fuentes, aide to John Kelly. Not one person has gone on the record to affirm any portion of the alleged comments. President Trump has accomplished historic rebuilding and massive increase in funding for the military, secured the largest pay raise in 10 years, and brought troops home. How realistic is this smear? How realistic is it? Trump would have said that. More like this is coming between now and November 3rd. Don't get fooled. The left assumes transparent, false hit jobs work in persuading stupid and uninformed voters. The left does not understand the power of alternative media and the truth. The Atlantic smear will end up helping Trump, not hurting him. And that, my very fine friends, is my show for today. This is America Can We Talk? I'm Debbie Georgatos. Thanks so much for tuning in every Monday through Thursday, 3 p.m. Central Time, to America Can We Talk, where I always talk truth about America because America matters. And I will talk to you next time.
America Can We Talk? Truth about America.
Can you hear?